I couldn't move my hands. I couldn't turn my head. I couldn't open my mouth to scream or whisper or beg. The painkillers my sister had been feeding me every 4 hours since my surgery had turned my body into a coffin, but my mind was wide awake. That's the part they didn't plan for. The pillowcase smelled like my mother's lavender fabric softener. The hallway nightlight threw a thin blue line across the ceiling. I lay there in my childhood bedroom in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, 2 days after an emergency appendectomy, conscious of everything happening around me and unable to do a damn thing about it. That's when I heard my sister's voice. Rachel was in the hallway, speaking to a man I didn't recognize. Her voice was low and steady, the kind of calm that doesn't come naturally, the kind you rehearse. "Just make it look like an accident," she said. "A complication, something post-surgical. Nobody's going to question it." The door to my room creaked open. It swung inward, slow and deliberate, and the blue light widened across the floor. Heavy footsteps crossed the threshold. A man's silhouette moved past the doorway toward my bed. He didn't come to my face. He went straight to the IV pole, to the drainage tube still attached to my surgical site. His fingers hovered over the line that ran from my body to the collection bag. This wasn't someone checking on me. This was someone sent to rearrange the scene. His fingers touched the tube. Then they stopped. He leaned closer. His breath hit my cheek, warm and uneven, and I forced every muscle in my face to stay dead. I kept my breathing shallow, kept my eyelids still. But something must have slipped, some flicker I couldn't control, because the man pulled back so fast the IV pole rattled. "She's not fully under," he whispered. His voice was shaking. "Her eyes. Something's off. I can't do this." He stumbled backward. His hip caught the bedside table, and something small fell to the floor, a quiet clatter against hardwood. He didn't stop to pick it up. He was already moving toward the door, his voice low and panicked. "I told you! I'm not a nurse! I don't know what I'm doing! Find someone else!" Rachel's answer was too quiet to catch. Then the front door opened and shut. A car engine turned over in the driveway, tires on gravel. Then nothing. I lay there, heart slamming against my ribs, unable to move, unable to breathe the way I wanted to breathe, listening to the silence he left behind. Something was on the floor, something he'd dropped. It was inches from my bed, and I couldn't reach it. Rachel came back into the room. I heard her heels on the hardwood, that familiar, sharp sound she'd made since we were teenagers. She always wore shoes in the house. I always went barefoot. Even our footsteps never sounded the same. She stood at the foot of my bed, didn't check my pulse, didn't touch my forehead, didn't say my name. She just watched me the way you'd watch a project running behind schedule. Then she let out a long, slow sigh. Not worry, not guilt, annoyance, pure frustration, the sound of someone whose contractor just walked off the job. She pulled out her phone, dialed. I caught every word. "He walked out, got cold feet." A pause. I know. We'll figure something else out before Thursday." Another pause, longer this time. "No, she's completely out. She won't remember any of this." Thursday. Something was happening. Thursday. Something that needed me sedated, confused, or worse. And my sister, the woman who'd volunteered to nurse me back to health, was standing 3 feet from my bed, making phone calls about it like she was rescheduling a dentist appointment. She left. The door clicked shut. Darkness settled back over the room. The drugs were beginning to thin. I could feel it in my fingertips first, a slow tingling spreading down through my hands. Then a dull burn at my incision site that meant the painkillers were losing their grip. The pain was real and sharp, and I held on to it like a rope someone had thrown me in deep water. Pain meant my body was coming back. Pain meant I could think. Pain meant that whatever they had planned for Thursday, I was not going to lie here and let it happen. I made 3 decisions in the dark. I would not swallow another pill Rachel handed me. I would play dead until I could move. And I would find out what that man dropped beside my bed. By morning, I'd have my first answer. But it didn't come from the floor. It came from my father's voice at 5 a.m. when he walked through the front door and said the kind of thing that splits your life into before and after. Every family has secrets. Mine had a business plan. And I was the only line item that wasn't supposed to survive the quarter. The front door opened at 5 in the morning. I knew it was my father before his footsteps hit the hallway because nobody else in that house moved with that kind of weight. Robert Carter didn't stop at my room, didn't glance through the door. He went straight to Rachel, and through the thin wall I heard his voice the way I'd heard it my whole life. Low, flat, certain. The voice of a man discussing inventory. Is she still down? Good. Keep her medicated through Thursday. Morris filed the paperwork yesterday. After the hearing, everything transfers to me. Morris. Paperwork, hearing, transfers. My father wasn't talking about his sick daughter. He was talking about an asset he was about to move on a ledger. Lying there, paralyzed, listening to him plan my disappearance the way he'd plan a quarterly budget, I thought about the first time I understood what I was to this family. Not a daughter, an investment. My name is Emily Carter, 35 years old, senior project manager at a medical technology firm in Richmond, Virginia. 12 years in the industry, own my condo outright, retirement funded since 24, credit score above 800, no debt. Nobody in my family knows any of this because I learned early that sharing accomplishments in that house was like bleeding in shark water. It only attracted something hungry. Growing up in Lewisburg, I was the quiet one. Good grades, no applause. Rachel was 4 years younger, and the axis the family revolved around. Charming, emotional, always in crisis. Our father rewarded proximity like a loyalty program. Rachel lived 20 minutes away and called every day. I moved 4 hours south and built my own life. In Robert's math, distance was betrayal. The last Thanksgiving I went home, 3 years ago, I baked a pie from scratch and drove 5 hours to deliver it warm. My mother, Diane, set it on the counter without a word. Rachel showed up 40 minutes late with a store-bought cake, and my father stood from his chair like she was visiting royalty. There she is! There's my girl! My pie sat untouched the entire night. 3 weeks before the night I couldn't move, I had an emergency appendectomy in Richmond. Routine surgery, rough recovery. My doctor said I'd need someone with me for 7 to 10 days. I planned to handle it alone. Then Rachel called. Her voice was warmer than I'd heard in years. Mom's worried sick, Em. Come home. I'll take care of everything. Your meds, your meals. You just rest. I should have questioned it. Rachel had never taken care of anyone. She was the one who needed rescuing. But the painkillers made thinking hard, and recovering alone in an empty condo felt worse than going home. I said yes. Drove 5 hours with fresh stitches in my side. From the moment I walked through that door, Rachel took control. She managed my medication personally, brought pills with water, watched me swallow. Day 2, she took my phone. Screen light causes headaches after anesthesia. Day 3, my laptop vanished. Put it in the car so you wouldn't work. Day 4, my car had been moved, and the keys were gone. No phone, no computer, no transportation, no contact with the outside world. I didn't see the pattern. I was drugged and in pain, and I trusted that my sister, however flawed, wouldn't actually harm me. I'd spent my whole life being careful about everyone except the people I shared blood with. That was the blind spot they counted on. Lying in that dark bedroom, I thought about my Aunt Margaret, my mother's younger sister, dead 3 years now. Small funeral. My father stood in the back, checking his phone. Rachel didn't show up. Margaret was the family's difficult one. She asked uncomfortable questions. She once told my mother in front of everyone at Thanksgiving, "Your husband treats your daughters like line items on a balance sheet, and you sit there and let him." After that dinner, Margaret was never invited back. My mother stopped returning her calls. The family's word for Margaret was dramatic. The family's punishment was silence. They erased her the way they erase anyone who sees the truth and refuses to look away. 2 months before she died, Margaret mailed me a fireproof document box. Heavy, padlocked, key taped to the bottom, a handwritten note tucked under the lid. "Emily, don't open this until you truly need to. And when you do, don't be scared of what you find. Be angry. You've earned it." I shoved the box in the back of my closet and forgot about it. I thought she was being dramatic. That word again. The word they used for every woman in this family who dared to have eyes. By 6 that morning, the tingling in my fingers was strong enough to make a fist. By 6:30, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to wait for Thursday. I was going to move tonight, starting with whatever that man had left on my floor. Rachel brought my pill at 7:15. Same soft voice, same glass of water. "Time for your meds, Em. Doctor's orders." I took the pill, put it on my tongue, drank. She watched me swallow, nodded, left. I spit it into my palm and tucked it under the mattress. Third one I'd hidden. Without the painkiller, the incision throbbed like a second heartbeat. But pain was clarity. That little white pill under my mattress was the first decision I'd made for myself in 6 days. It tasted like freedom, and it hurt like hell. I spent the whole day performing unconsciousness. Eyes shut, breathing heavy. Through the walls, I heard Rachel on the phone in the kitchen. Not casual talk, but the clipped rhythm of planning. My mother shuffled to my door once, paused, walked away without entering. My father's car left at 9 and didn't return until dark. Nobody checked my temperature. Nobody asked about pain. The caregiving was never about care. That night, with the house quiet, I heard my father stop outside my door. He was on his phone, pacing. Thursday morning, 9 a.m., Judge Callahan's courtroom. Morris submitted the evaluation.
Cognitive decline post-anesthesia, diminished capacity. It's airtight. Pause. She has no idea. Rachel's keeping her comfortable. Another pause. Once I have guardianship, I consolidate, move everything under my authority. She won't know until it's done.
Then he said something that turned everything cold. "And if the hearing doesn't go as planned, that's why we had the backup option. Post-surgical complications are more common than people think. No one would question it." The stranger in my room, the hand on my drainage tube, that was the backup option. If the courtroom failed, my father had a plan for me to die of a complication in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the family that was supposed to love me. My hands shook under the blanket, not from drugs, from rage. 2 a.m. House dark. I pushed myself upright, and the incision screamed. I pressed one hand against the gauze and swung my legs off the mattress. The floor was ice under my bare feet. I stood and nearly collapsed. 6 days of medication had eaten my muscles to nothing. I grabbed the bedpost and held on until the room stopped moving. The floor first. I got on my knees and reached under the bed. My fingers brushed something small, rectangular, stiff. A card. I brought it close to the nightlight glow. Daniel Brooks, licensed private investigator, Commonwealth of Virginia. Not a killer. Not a nurse. A PI. Someone hired him. I needed to know who. I crept to Rachel's room. Door cracked. She was asleep, face lit by her charging phone. I knew her passcode, birthday reversed, and I picked up the phone without looking at her face. The last time I'd felt anything sisterly was before the night she sighed at the foot of my bed like I was a deadline she'd missed. I moved through the dark house, past my parents' room, past the kitchen where Rachel's chamomile mug sat in the sink. My car was gone, but her keys hung by the back door. I took them. November air hit the wound through my shirt, and I gasped, but I kept moving. Got in her car and drove. No destination. Just away. 25 minutes down Route 15. Highway rest stop. Fluorescent lights. Empty lot. Vending machine humming. I parked with shaking hands. The incision was bleeding again, warmth spreading under the gauze. Didn't matter. I pulled out Daniel's card and dialed. 4 rings. Groggy voice. Brooks, this is Emily Carter. You were in my bedroom 2 nights ago reaching for my surgical tube. Tell me why. Dead silence. Then, sharp awake. You're talking. You're coherent. They told me you were non-responsive, barely conscious. How are you calling me? Because I stopped swallowing what they gave me. Now talk. He talked. Hired by my father 4 weeks ago to build evidence I was mentally and financially incompetent. Objective: support a guardianship petition. Daniel investigated me for 3 weeks and found nothing. Spotless record, stable career, no psych history. But he stumbled on financial documents tied to my name that I'd never created. Loan applications, credit lines, a business account. Totaling over $300,000. He'd gone to the house to warn me. Rachel intercepted him, introduced him as a friend with medical experience, said I'd taken a bad turn. He walked into my room expecting a patient. He saw the IV pole, the drainage tube, and then my eyes. Conscious. And he knew the whole thing was wrong. Your father didn't hire me to protect you, Emily. He hired me to build the cage. But what I found inside it was the crime he was hiding, and Thursday is just the lock. I sat in the fluorescent glow of a rest stop, bleeding through my gauze, holding my sister's stolen phone, talking to the man who was supposed to destroy me. I told him to meet me in Virginia. I had a box to open. I reached Richmond by mid-morning. My condo looked the same as I'd left it. Mail overflowing, neighbor's cat on the doormat. Everything ordinary and quiet and completely disconnected from the week I'd just survived. I stood in my own living room looking at my books, my coffee maker, my coat on the hook, and that's when it landed. This is what they want to take. Not just money, not just a forged signature. My life. The quiet, stubborn, hard-won independence I'd built piece by piece while they pretended I didn't exist. It wasn't much, but it was entirely mine. And that's exactly why it was in danger. The box was in the back of my closet where I'd left it 3 years ago. Gray metal, padlocked, dust on the lid. I peeled the key off the bottom, carried it to the kitchen table, and opened it. On top was a composition notebook. Aunt Margaret's handwriting, small and precise, the penmanship of a woman who knew nobody would listen, so she wrote it down instead. 5 years of entries tracking my father's financial activity with the patience of someone building a case she'd never get to argue. 3 entries stopped me cold. Found a loan application from 2016 in Emily's name. She was 25. I guarantee she never signed this. Further in. Confronted Diane. She told me to mind my own business. Near the end, shakier handwriting. Robert called tonight. Said if I keep stirring up drama, I won't be welcome at Christmas. So this is how it works. You see the truth and they punish you for having eyes. Below the diary were photocopies, loan applications, credit agreements, a business account registration. Every document bearing my name, my social security number, and a forged version of my signature. Total debt, over $300,000. All business loans for my father's construction supply company, a company that had been failing for years. He'd started stealing my identity when I was 23, the year I moved out, the year I stopped being useful in person and became useful on paper. At the bottom, a letter. Margaret's handwriting, dated 2 months before she died.
Emily, your father has been using your name since you left home. I tried telling your mother. She chose him. I tried confronting him. He exiled me. The family calls me the crazy one. Fine. But I kept copies of everything. When you need this, don't be sad. Be furious. You are not what they made you. You are what you survived. I didn't cry. I held a dead woman's letter, and something turned inside me like a lock opening. Not grief. Recognition. Margaret wasn't dramatic. Margaret was the only person in my family brave enough to look at the truth and write it down. They erased her for it. The same way they'd been erasing me. Daniel arrived by early afternoon with his own file. We spread everything across the table, and the picture clicked into place. My father's company had been hemorrhaging money for 8 years. He'd borrowed against it using my stolen identity. The guardianship wasn't about controlling me. It was about making me absorb his debt. If the court declared me incompetent, he'd become my legal guardian, take my finances, and I'd have no standing to challenge the loans. No lawyer, no courtroom, no voice. I'd become a permanent financial hostage while he walked free. So, it's not about taking what I have, I said. It's about making me carry what he owes. Daniel nodded. It's both. He takes yours and dumps his. You become the hole he pours everything into. Then he told me about Rachel. Her divorce finalized 8 months ago. Lost the house. Drowning in debt. My father offered her a deal. Keep Emily sedated and isolated. Handle the complications, and the family home is yours once the guardianship goes through. Rachel wasn't being manipulated. She was being compensated. Her warmth on the phone, her careful pill schedule, her frustrated sigh when the stranger walked out. None of it was love. She was buying a house with my ruin. I needed a lawyer, not someone who handled wills and property disputes, someone who specialized in guardianship abuse and financial fraud and wouldn't blink at any of this. Daniel knew someone, Victoria Nguyen, former federal prosecutor, now in private practice. She eats cases like this for breakfast,
he said, and she doesn't scare easy. I told him to make the call. That night, I taped Margaret's letter to my refrigerator so I'd see it every time I walked through.
You are not what they made you. You are what you survived.
I read those words every morning for the next 2 days while we built our case. Every time I doubted myself, every time I wondered if I was tearing my family apart, I looked at Margaret's handwriting and remembered. The last woman in this family who told the truth was erased for it. I was not going to let that happen again. Wednesday morning, 1 day before Thursday. Victoria Nguyen's voice came through the speakerphone on my kitchen table, calm and precise, the voice of someone who knew exactly where to cut. She'd taken the case the night before, after Daniel showed her the evidence. Her first instruction was simple. Call your surgeon's office, the one who actually operated on you. Get the discharge record. If it says you were competent when you left the hospital and Morris's evaluation says you weren't, that's not a difference of opinion. That's fraud. I called Centara Medical Center in Richmond. Within an hour, the discharge summary was in my email. I read it aloud. Patient discharged in stable condition, alert and oriented, cognitive function intact, capable of independent decision-making. I set that document beside Morris's court evaluation. Cognitively impaired, diminished capacity, incapable of self-governance. 2 medical documents. 1 patient. Opposite conclusions. My surgeon examined me. Morris never did. He wrote his evaluation based on a phone call from my father. Daniel dug into Morris while Victoria prepared the motion. Dr. Gerald Morris, family physician in Lewisburg, Carter family doctor for 22 years. But Daniel found a county business filing from 2018 showing Morris had invested $15,000 in my father's construction company, the company that failed, the company whose debts were forged in my name. Morris wasn't just complicit. He was a creditor. He signed that evaluation to protect his own money. Victoria, after a long pause. That's conspiracy. Add it to the file. Early afternoon. My new phone rang. Unknown Pennsylvania number. Rachel. Emily, I know you left. I know you took my phone. Her voice was tight, controlled, but something underneath was vibrating. She launched in before I could speak. You're confused. The medication, the surgery. Come home. We'll sort this out as a family. No lawyers, no strangers. Just family. She used that word 3 times in under a minute like a password she kept entering, hoping the lock would turn. If you go to a lawyer, you'll embarrass everyone.
Don't blow this up over a misunderstanding.
I recognized the playbook. Same one they used on Margaret. Call the truth a misunderstanding. Call the person who sees it confused. Make the whistleblower feel like the arsonist. I didn't yell. My voice was level. $300,000 in forged loans. A doctor who signed a cognitive evaluation without examining me. A doctor who invested in Dad's failed company. A guardianship petition filed to the wrong address so I'd never see it. And a man you let into my bedroom to tamper with my surgical equipment. I let the silence stretch. Tell me which part is a misunderstanding, Rachel. Quiet. I could hear her breathing. Then her voice changed. The warmth evaporated. What was left was flat, hard, stripped clean. You always thought you were better than us. Moving away. Building your little career. Never calling. You left this family, Emily. A breath. I stayed. Every Sunday dinner, every crisis. And what did I get? A divorce that took everything. A rental I can barely afford. Then the line that cut deepest. Dad promised me the house if I helped him sort this out. So yes, I helped. Because somebody in this family deserves something. And for once, it was going to be me. She wasn't sorry. She'd calculated the cost of my destruction against the value of a house and decided it was fair. The betrayal wasn't born from manipulation. It was born from resentment that had been composting for years. Rachel believed she was the victim. I'll see you in court, Rachel. I hung up, set the phone face down, looked at Margaret's letter on the fridge. No tears, just clarity, the kind that burns. Victoria arrived that evening, mid-40s, sharp suit, reading glasses she used like punctuation. Strategy for Thursday. I'd pass the court's independent competency evaluation, neutralizing Morris. She'd present counter-evidence and request a criminal referral to the U.S. attorney. This isn't a guardianship defense anymore. We're counterattacking. Daniel signed his affidavit at my table. Every detail, from who hired him to what he saw the night he walked into my bedroom. I organized Margaret's documents across my living room floor. 12 years of fraud laid out like a crime scene. Then Victoria said one more thing before she left. There's something I need to verify tonight. If it's what I think, the hearing tomorrow won't just end your father's scheme. It'll end his freedom. I didn't sleep. I stood at my kitchen window looking at Richmond in the dark and thought about Margaret's words. Be angry. You've earned it. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot and burns out. What I had now was colder, steadier, the kind of thing that doesn't flicker in the wind. Tomorrow my father would sit in a courtroom and watch his invisible daughter become the last thing he ever wanted her to be. Undeniable. 11 at night. The hearing was 10 hours away. Every document was printed, labeled, boxed, nothing left to prepare, just the waiting. Then Victoria called. I verified it. Emily, sit down. I'm sitting. Your father took out a life insurance policy in your name 14 months ago, $750,000. He's listed as the sole beneficiary. She walked through it. Robert applied for the policy using my stolen identity, the same pipeline he'd used for the loans. Forged signatures, my social security number, medical history fabricated by Morris. I was never notified because the billing address was the Pennsylvania house. The premiums were auto-drafted from an account I didn't know existed. The policy had a 2-year contestability period, 14 months in. In 10 more months, it would become virtually unchallengeable. I sat in my dark apartment with the phone pressed to my ear, and the entire story of the past week rewrote itself. The stranger in my room wasn't just there to create a complication for the guardianship. He was there to test whether it was possible, whether my post-surgical setup could be tampered with, whether it would look natural enough. Rachel's whisper, "Make it look like an accident," wasn't about paperwork. It was about death. My father's backup option, post-surgical complications no one would question, wasn't hypothetical. It was Plan B. If the guardianship failed, the insurance was there, $750,000, enough to erase every debt he owed and walk away clean. My father didn't just steal my name. He put a price on my life, $750,000. That's what I was worth to him dead. Victoria's voice, steady. "When I present this tomorrow, your father will be arrested before he leaves the courtroom." 2 a.m., Thursday. I sat on my living room floor surrounded by the evidence laid out in order. Discharge record proving I was competent. Morris's fraudulent evaluation and his $15,000 investment. Margaret's diary and 12 years of forged documents. Daniel's sworn affidavit. The audio recording Daniel had made the night he entered my room. Rachel's voice thin and clear. Make it look like an accident, a complication. And the life insurance policy. 6 categories. 12 years of lies. 1 hearing. My father had built a cage out of paperwork and silence. He'd made me invisible so no one would notice when I disappeared. But Margaret noticed. Daniel noticed. Victoria noticed. And in a few hours, a judge would notice too. I took Margaret's letter from the fridge, folded it carefully, placed it in the pocket of the jacket I'd wear to court. She couldn't walk into that courtroom. The letter could. 5 a.m. I drove north on I-81. My car, not Rachel's, not borrowed. Victoria and Daniel followed in their own vehicles. I rehearsed my testimony through the hands-free while sunrise broke over the Shenandoah Valley, and I thought about the last time I'd driven this road, a week ago, in pain, trusting my sister's voice. A different woman had made that drive. 8:40. County Courthouse in Lewisburg. Small brick building, colonial, the kind of place built for zoning disputes and property easements, not family conspiracies. I stepped out into November, cold. The surgical incision still ached with every step, but I walked without limping. Dark gray blazer, simple earrings, flat shoes. Daniel met me at the entrance, wearing a tie for the first time since I'd known him. He didn't say anything encouraging, just nodded. That was enough. Victoria arrived with a rolling case of evidence, reading glasses on, phone off. She looked at me outside the courtroom door. "You ready?" I touched the pocket where Margaret's letter sat, felt the folded paper against my ribs. I've been ready for 12 years. I just didn't know it. We walked in. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, American flag behind the bench, a handful of people in the gallery waiting for their own cases. The petitioner's table was on the left. 2 people already seated. My father in a suit I'd never seen, too new, too clean, like a costume for a performance. His jaw set, his eyes on a manila folder. He didn't look up when I entered. Rachel sat beside him, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked smaller in that room, like the building itself had reduced her. I walked to the respondent's table. Victoria beside me. Daniel took a seat in the front row. I set my bag down, pulled out my chair, sat. The scrape of the chair against the floor made my father look up. Our eyes met. His face went white, not red. White. the color of a man who'd expected to win by default and just realized the game had changed completely. He opened his mouth, closed it, said nothing. For the first time in 35 years, Robert Carter had nothing to say to me, and that silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard from him. The court-appointed evaluator was Dr. Linda Cho, independent, no connection to either side. She asked standard questions. My full name, date of birth, home address, employer, monthly budget, retirement contributions, current project at work, president, date, day of the week. She studied me over her glasses with the curiosity of a professional wondering why this case had been filed at all. 20 minutes. That's all it took. She returned to the courtroom. The respondent demonstrates no cognitive impairment, fully oriented, articulate, clear capacity for independent decision-making. No clinical basis for this petition. My father's attorney leaned over and whispered something urgent. Robert shook his head sharply, but the panic was breaking through. Rachel stared at the wall and didn't blink. Judge Sandra Callahan made a note. Looked at Victoria. Counsel, additional evidence? Victoria stood. Quite a bit, Your Honor. Medical fraud first. Discharge record beside Morris's evaluation. Morris never examined me. His report was based on information from the petitioner, and he had $15,000 invested in the petitioner's failed business. This evaluation isn't medicine, Your Honor. It's a business transaction. Then, identity theft. Margaret's documentation. 12 years of forged loans and accounts in my name. Over $300,000. The petitioner didn't file for guardianship to protect his daughter. He filed to ensure she could never challenge the debts he created in her name. Daniel took the stand. Hired by Robert Carter to prove I was incompetent. Found nothing. Discovered the fraud instead. Went to warn me. Rachel intercepted him. He described what he saw in my room. Me paralyzed. Surgical equipment beside the bed. Rachel giving instructions. Victoria played the audio recording. Rachel's voice filled the courtroom, thin and unmistakable. Make it look like an accident, a complication. Nobody will question it after surgery. The same words from the first night. Full circle. My father's attorney put his head in his hands. Then the life insurance.
$750,000 on my life. Robert Carter, sole beneficiary. Opened with forged documents. Victoria let it speak. If the respondent died of a post-surgical complication in the care of her court-appointed guardian, no investigation would follow. The petitioner would collect $750,000, his debts erased, his daughter gone. The courtroom went still. Judge Callahan removed her glasses, set them on the bench, looked at my father with controlled, precise disgust. 30 seconds of silence. This petition is denied. I am referring this matter to the United States Attorney for criminal investigation. Identity theft, financial fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, medical misconduct. She looked at Robert. Mr. Carter, you will be held in custody pending federal review. You will not leave this courtroom a free man. She turned to Rachel. Mrs. Carter, you will remain for questioning.
Bailiffs moved. Robert stood. Chair scraped the floor. He looked at his attorney. His attorney was packing his briefcase, face blank, done. I watched the cuffs close around my father's wrists and felt not joy, not triumph, relief, the vast relief of someone who'd been holding her breath for 35 years and could finally exhale. The courtroom emptied. Robert let out. Victoria with the clerk. Rachel stood at the petitioner's table. Hadn't moved. Purse on the table, coat over the chair. She looked like someone waiting for a bus that was never coming. I walked toward the door. As I passed, she spoke. Flat. You destroyed this family. I stopped, turned, looked at my sister the way I'd looked at evidence on my living room floor. Carefully. without sentimentality. No, Rachel. I just turned the lights on. What you see in the light, that was always the family we had. She said nothing more. Eyes dry. Didn't look away. And in that refusal to flinch, I saw the thing that frightened me most. She still believed she was right. Outside. November air. Weak sunlight. I sat on a bench and let the cold press against my face. My phone buzzed. One text from a contact I hadn't heard from in 9 days. Mom. 5 words. I knew. I always knew. No explanation. No apology. Just the barest confession typed from somewhere far from this courthouse by a woman who'd chosen not to be present. My mother knew. And her version of telling me was 5 words on a screen after someone else had done the saving, after a courtroom had done the believing she never would. I locked the phone, set it face down, didn't reply. Daniel appeared beside me. Didn't sit, just stood there. Present. I looked up at the sky, took a breath. It was over. Not clean, not painless, not the kind of ending that makes you feel whole. But it was over. My father was in custody. My sister was answering questions she couldn't lie her way out of. My mother was wherever she always was, nowhere that mattered. And I was sitting on a bench in the cold with a man who'd started as a stranger and become the first person in years who saw me as someone worth protecting. The invisible daughter had spoken, and for the first time in her life, every person in that courtroom had listened. 3 months later, I sat in a federal courthouse and watched my father stand before a judge in an orange jumpsuit. First time I'd ever seen Robert Carter look less than composed. Even then, he stood straight. Even then, he performed. Identity theft, financial fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy. 10 to 15 years, federal prison, no early parole. He didn't look at me. Not during the sentencing. Not when they led him out. He never looked at me. Not when I was a child trying to earn his attention, and not when I was a woman fighting for her life. I didn't feel victory. I felt the sensation of a weight being set down, something I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. Dr. Morris had his medical license permanently revoked. Rachel received 3 years probation, mandatory restitution, and a permanent restraining order. She never reached out. No letter. No call. I sometimes wonder if she still believes she was right. I think she does. Some people build their identity around a grievance, and dismantling it would mean dismantling themselves. My mother reached out twice, once by phone, unanswered, once by letter about fear and forgiveness. She didn't mention the night I lay paralyzed, didn't explain those 5 words on a courthouse bench. I wrote back once. Silence in the face of harm is not neutrality, it's participation. I understand fear, but understanding why someone watched you drown doesn't mean you owe them a seat in your boat. If you want to be in my life, the door isn't locked, but you'll have to walk through it yourself, through action. Haven't heard back. I used the restitution to establish the Margaret Carter Foundation, named for the woman who refused to stop seeing the truth even when it cost her everything. Legal advocacy for adults targeted by abusive guardianship petitions. Financial literacy for women recovering from identity theft. A medical rights hotline to help people verify their evaluations are legitimate. Motto on every piece of letterhead: your body, your mind, your decision. Some weeks I stay up past midnight, answering emails from women whose stories sound so much like mine, I have to close the laptop and breathe. But the work means something. The woman they called dramatic now has her name on an organization that exists to believe people when they speak up. I moved to a new apartment in Richmond. 2 bedrooms, a window facing east. It's not a mansion. It's a place that belongs entirely to me, furnished with choices nobody else made. After 35 years of being someone's line item, the ordinary privacy of my own space feels extravagant. Daniel Brooks became a friend, not a love interest. Coffee on Saturdays. Once he said something I wrote down. Nobody in your family had a single good thing to say about you, and your record was the cleanest I'd ever investigated. When a family hates the best person in it, something's broken, and it isn't the person they hate. My surgical scar healed. A thin line on my lower right side. Most days I forget it's there, but some mornings I catch it in the mirror, the wound they tried to use as a weapon. It reminds me my body healed even when the people around it were trying to break it. I stand on my balcony these evenings with peppermint tea, never chamomile, watching the river catch streetlight. I think about the night it started, the whisper, the paralysis. I think about Margaret and the courage it took to write the truth when no one would listen. I think about the pill I spit out, how small it was, how everything that followed grew from that one refusal. I used to believe surviving meant being strong enough to endure whatever they gave me. I was wrong. Surviving is being brave enough to stop enduring, to spit out the pill, to open the box, to walk into a courtroom and say, I am here, I am real, and you do not get to erase me. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is simply refuse to disappear. Emily's story is over, but maybe yours isn't. If you've ever been the one who saw the truth and was punished for it, the one they called difficult or dramatic because you refused to look the other way, I want you to know something. You were not the problem. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so the next one finds you. Leave a comment and tell me, when did you realize the person who was supposed to protect you was the one you needed protection from? Your answer might be the thing someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you know a woman who's still in that dark room, still swallowing the pills they hand her, still being told she's confused when she knows she's not, send her this video. Sometimes one story is enough to make someone spit out the pill.
Thank you for staying until the end. That matters more than you know.